Hi, I'm Claire Mitchell, QC. Welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast. I'm a lawyer who specialises in miscarriage of justice cases, and we're bringing you this podcast because we want to tell you about the women who were accused, prosecuted, convicted, and ultimately executed as witches in Scotland.
I'm Zoe Venditozzi, and I'm a writer who's always had an interest in the witches, and I feel that this dark mark against Scotland needs a reckoning.
The campaign Witches of Scotland wants three things. Firstly, a pardon for all those convicted of witchcraft. Secondly, an apology for all those who were accused as witches. And finally, a national monument in recognition of all those who are affected by this terrible miscarriage of justice.
Over the forthcoming weeks, we'll be talking to a whole host of experts about the history and the modern day connections to the Witches of Scotland. Hello and welcome to episode 55. 55.
5-5.
5-5.
Man alive, all the fives.
Man alive, all the fives. What do we win for that this week?
We win an opportunity to go on to the next one.
Good, because actually, jokes aside, Claire, if you can be serious just for 1 minute, Claire Mitchell QC, we've actually got some fantastic guests also lined up to interview in the next couple of weeks that are very exciting. I mean, all our guests are obviously really exciting, but I can't believe how many people we've still got on our list to interview after 55 episodes.
I know. And thank you to all of those very patient people that we contact and say, oh, can we interview you? And they say yes. And we go, cool, we'll get back to you. Your name is on a list of people. And
massive list.
Back to everybody.
Yeah, no, it's really, really amazing. And I think one thing that's really nice that somebody said this week was that because we have like a real range of different historians and experts, academics, so on, there gives quite different viewpoints on different things. And like, I think one thing that's quite interesting, obviously in light of recent events, is some historian stance is different to other historian stance on whether there should be apologies given after the fact. And I think that's a really interesting and rich area to discuss, you know, especially, Claire, as I don't know if you know this, but an apology was actually issued.
What?
On International Women's Day. I know we've done a little standalone podcast for that we recorded on the day, a sort of a bit of, as you called it, Claire, gonzo journalism.
Yeah.
So we've done that. So I presume that all our listeners already know about that. I think that's really interesting, though, to keep discussing it and thinking about it in terms of where we are now in 2022. And, you know, I think that's really fascinating. So I love having that range of voices.
I really like the idea of historians talking about what history is, whether or not we should, as they say, interfering with history. But I just look at it from a completely different perspective as a non-academic, a non-historian. I look at it as somebody who looks at miscarriage of justice and no time limit on justice. We can go back at any point in time and say that was wrong and identify that. And I don't think that's changing history. I think that's changing our present.
Yeah, because there's one thing that I know that we're both really passionate about, which is the idea that it's not just a single sex issue, and that, of course, 15% of those accused were men. You know, we do know that. But with 85% being women, it is a gendered issue. It is for me personally. And I think that because we still live in very misogynistic times, it is still pertinent because to me, it explains a certain part of the structure of patriarchy that's in place for hundreds of years, which of course had already been in place for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before that. But we're not out of the woods on that one. So to me, to address that, it shines a light on modern misogyny, modern sexism. And if people can't get that, then those men just maybe need to think a bit more about it. And I think that's why so many women just immediately, when they think about what we're talking about, click with them. And I'm not saying that all women are necessarily behind it, but certainly the vast majority of our supporters are women, and we've got lots of really great male supporters too. But the negative voices are almost always men. And they're almost always men saying something along the lines of, let it go, hen. Just, it was hundreds of years ago. Or making jokes saying, oh, am I going to get money for my family or the reparations? Just to make this really clear, we're not looking for reparations. We just want it to be talked about, and we just want people to recognise that it's a serious thing. But I tell you, see, with the misogyny, Claire, with things that have been written over the last few weeks, it's amazing. The sexism in comments of people that are negative, there's still comment after comment after comment about particularly the First Minister, particularly about Nicola Sturgeon. She's a witch. She's a witch. Is she doing this for herself? Is it, she can protect herself in years to come? It's just pathetic. Like, get a grip, boys.
It's also lazy. It's like, what? Yeah. How long did it take you to think that and write that down? That's,
Get some new gags, guys.
Why do you think sharing that with the world is adding any value to anything?
Do you think your mum's proud of you? I don't think she is. I think she's ashamed of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, anyway. just Zoe's shaking her head in a forlorn fashion when she's saying, like I said. Sad.
Aye. Anyway, so what else have we got in the news apart from that big, marvellous thing?
Apart from the fact that on International Women's Day, Nicola Sturgeon gave an apology, and we've already linked that in the last episode, we'll not go over that again. We were also in the news this week, Zoe, and some very exciting news for us.
Yeah, I'm still shaking my head in disbelief at this one. Claire, not for you. Like, I think I can understand why you have had this nomination, because you're the great and the good in the legal world. But Claire and I have been named as finalists in the Scottish Women of the Year Awards, which is super exciting. And I don't think we'll win. You should see the list of the other people that are finalists. Yeah. They're really fantastic. I don't think we'll win. But I don't care if we don't win, because I'm just going to, for the rest of my life, go, well, as you know, I was a finalist in the Scottish Women of the Year Awards. I'm not going to let that go.
No, absolutely. I've been so delighted with it all week. It's so long running. It's been going on since 1963. There are some really amazing women that have been involved in the process. When you look through, you go on the website, you can look through and see all the different people that have been involved. And it's just hugely flattering. When I opened the email, first of all, I mean, I know we both got emails about it. When I opened the email, I was like, nah, this is going to be some spam email that if I open up, it's going to be sent to everyone else on my list as well. I just didn't believe it. But
no, it's quite shocking. So that will be announced on the 31st of March. So I don't think there's any voting from the public or anything like that. I think that we've been nominated. We don't know who by. And then I think a panel then decides who the winner is.
Yeah, I think for the Young Scotswomen of the Year, there's voting.
That is a vote, isn't it?
And not for the old ones.
I think it's definitely worth having a look. If you Google it, Scottish Women of the Year 2021, there's a bit in it where you can vote for the Young Scottish Women of the Year. And the young women that are up for that one are doing really amazing things. So it's definitely worth getting involved in that. I've cast my vote for that one. So I'm pleased. I'll look forward to meeting them on the night when we go along and meet the other finalists. But what else is there in the news, Claire?
Well, talk about a news week we've had. So on the 16th of this very month, just a few days ago, Danny Garavelli and Caitlin Smith had a BBC Radio 4 documentary called The Witches' Pardon. And what happened was that they followed us about during parts of the campaign. They were with us on International Women's Day. They went to speak to other people about their interest in the witch trials, about the modern day issues of misogyny, and really got it. You know, if you have the opportunity, go on BBC Sounds and listen to it. It comes up just under The Witches' Pardon. If you put in the word witches, it'll come up. And it's definitely worth a listen because it's half an hour. It really gets it. It talks to so many people. They speak to Zoe? They speak to Sylvia Federici, Emeritus Professor, Kezia Dugdale. They speak to Doug Spears, which is fantastic. They speak to Professor Goodyear.
Natalie Dawn, MSP.
Yeah, it was great. The bit where she's going round, they're trying to show her where the memorial is in Paisley. It's really, really funny when some woman flags them down and points them in the direction of it. So yeah, a really, really brilliant listen. And they got so much of the story into that time that I think if anyone's asking, what's the witchcraft stuff that you're into about, and why are you interested in getting a pardon and apology? It's just a brilliant half an hour that says it all, really.
Yeah, no, it's definitely worth having a look at.
And Zoe, not only did we hit the media in the UK, we also had some US media this week.
Yes, really, really nice, actually. We spoke to a journalist from CBS for their morning news show, I think it is. So that was really great. And the journalist we spoke to there, she was very interested because, like I'm sure lots of Americans, she knew a little bit about Salem, but didn't really know anything about what had happened in Scotland previously. So it was really nice to talk to her, and hopefully we'll get some new people listening, or people that are already in will be able to listen to us talking on their morning news show.
Yeah, I was just really excited. It was like when the Wall Street Journal had something about us on it. It's those big names of those American corporations that you hear about and never think that anyone would ever ask you. But yeah, so if we get any links to that, we'll share them with you. I'm not sure whether or not we can, but we'll definitely try for that. So Zoe, I think that's probably enough news for this week.
Yes. So this week we've been contacted by one of our listeners who actually we had the pleasure of meeting on International Women's Day on the top of Carlton Hill. She came along to see Laurie Graham's amazing art piece there, that sort of spectacle. And it was lovely to meet her in the flesh. But Elisa had written to us, and I think we'll probably have her on a show in the future. But she's been doing some research, and I thought that would be nice to look at who she's researched into for the people that we're going to remember for today. So she's been looking into the witch trials in Peebles, and I think I'd maybe met up on Twitter and then in real life with Mary Craig to discuss what she knew about Peebles and about what she'd written about in her book. And people, of course, that are listening will know that Mary Craig is a past guest and is fascinating and has written extensively about this area and is a real font of knowledge for it. So the two of them working together, and Elisa has gone on and researched one particular case in Peebles. So there's a big list apparently that were accused of witchcraft in the Tweedale area. But the main case that stands out for her was in Peebles in 1629, where a remarkably long list of 27 people were brought to trial at the same time. So Mary has done lots of research into it, but it's very difficult, Elisa says, to pinpoint the first moment or reason that the 27 were accused. But in May 1629, there were lots of rumours flying around about the individuals in the group, which included things like 3 of the women accused had tended to the sick the previous year, but none of them themselves had fallen ill. A neighbour of one of the accused had an argument with them, and the next day their horse had gone lame. So your real kind of classic accusations. The presbytery and Peebles called in local folk to ask questions, and within days, the 27 names were given to the bailies and sheriffs of Peebles, Dalkeith and Glasgow, and they were told to search for, apprehend, arrest and interrogate said accused persons. Several of the accused had made a run for it, but they were eventually all apprehended and brought to Peebles for interrogation. One of the accused, Isabel Haddock, who was recorded as being a young girl, was the first to confess, and that's in inverted commas, under the pressure. She told the bailies that she had visited a local place called Tor Hill, where she'd met with the devil and others had come with her. She agreed to name the others, and I like the use of the word agreed there because, you know, as we'll know, it was probably under extreme duress.
Absolutely, not agreement at all. No free agreement.
And upon this confession, all of the other 26 people broke down and confessed too, and the trial was set for the 11th of July. The 27 people had no representation in court and they didn't put up a fight. By the end of the trial, 24 had been found guilty and 3 were not proven. 5 days later, the 24 were walked barefoot and bareheaded to a place called the Calf No in Peebles, where they were worried and then burned in tar barrels. Oh, it's so sad. Despite receiving a verdict of not proven, the remaining 3 people were retained in custody, and at the next presbytery session, they discussed how to proceed with them. It was felt that if the other 24 had been guilty, then how could these 3 not be? The 3 people were kept in custody all summer and autumn and were finally retried on December 22nd, 1629, where they all received, surprisingly, a guilty verdict. They were then taken to Calf No, strangled and burned as well on Christmas Eve. It's said that the minister, Archibald Sid, had led his flock directly from the execution site to the kirk for the midnight Christmas service. I mean, you can't get any more brutal than that. I just don't understand that at all. Yeah. So Peebles is a small town today, and in 1629, it would have been barely even a large village. The idea of 27 people from the local area being put to death during the second half of the year is unthinkable, and it would have affected everyone in the area. There's no doubt. So Elisa has asked that we read out the names and the story of these people so that they are highlighted. And she says quite rightly there are many others, but this is such a tragic case that she felt it needed to be told to the world. So here are the names, okay? Agnes Chalmers, Susanna Elphinstone, Margaret Yerkin, William Thompson, William Matheson, Thomas Stoddart, Agnes Robeson, Catherine Brune, Marie Jonestown, which is maybe Johnston, Janet Henderson, Agnes Thompson, Catherine Wood, Marion Crozier, Isabel Haddock, Gilbert Hogg, Jean Watson, Margaret Dixon, Margaret Johnston, Janet Aitchison, Bessie Err, Catherine Alexander, Helen Beattie, Margaret Gowanlock, Marion Boyd, Catherine Mayershell, Patrick Linton, and John the Joke Graham. So Elise's hope is that eventually a memorial will be erected in Peebles to recognise the lives lost in the town. And she also hopes they can create a space in the local museum to have a permanent record of the witch trials. She says that she's obviously in support of the National State Memorial and the apology. She wrote this before we received the apology, and most importantly, a pardon. So she's very much a supporter. So Elisa, thank you so much for getting in touch, and hopefully we'll get you on at some point. You can talk to us about that as well.
Yeah, thank you. That's so kind. And we remember those women and men killed as witches who were in fact just ordinary folk.
So today's guest is Danny Buck, who we met again on Twitter, who's a really interesting person to follow. He's a Norwich-based researcher who's just completed his thesis, Presbyterianism, Urban Politics and Division, the 1645 Great Yarmouth Witch Hunt in Context at the UEA, which is the University of East Anglia, supervised by none other than Professor Malcolm Gaskill and Professor Polly Ha. He has worked to understand the political and religious divisions that lay behind witch hunting in 17th century Great Yarmouth, exploring the nature of urban politics, religious divisions and Puritanism. This has led to articles on as diverse topics as herring piracy and astrology, interesting, including a chapter in Routledge's Folklore, Magic and Witchcraft Cultural Exchanges from the 12th to 18th century. You can find him on Twitter at Danny Buck UEA. Hi, Danny, and welcome to the podcast. We're delighted to have you on. So, hello.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, of course, we've got in touch with you because we interact with you on Twitter, and it's one of the sort of the nice corners of Twitter. It's historical Twitter, I think. There's a lot of really good, well-behaved, polite, intelligent, curious people that are interacting under the history banner on Twitter. So that's, of course, where we met you, in speech marks, in quotations, not actual meeting. But it's nice to kind of meet you in this area. And we've brought you on today. We've invited you on today because you obviously have an interest in our subject area. So I think maybe the first thing would be really useful if you tell the listeners who you are and what you do.
So I'm Danny. I've spent the last decade of my life looking at the witch hunt in Great Yarmouth, possibly longer than I needed to, but it's been a really exciting process. Previous to that, I did an undergraduate with Perry Gorsey at Oxford. He's a lovely chap, and he'd written this fantastic book about Great Yarmouth during the Restoration and beyond. And he comes to me when I'm thinking about doing a dissertation. He says, there's something weird going on in Great Yarmouth during the 1640s. Why don't you take a look? So I did. I thought, that's really interesting. There's this really interesting religious problem, people starting to fall apart. And, I finished that off and I think, I've tried the real world. I don't like it. I should continue back at academia. I ended up at the UEA under the fantastic Malcolm Gaskill. Have you chatted with him yet?
Malcolm is slated to appear hopefully very soon. He's a super busy guy, but I am so excited about speaking to him.
He's a fantastic supervisor. It's a real loss to the profession that he's decided he, wants to get on with other things. But obviously his great work was on Matthew Hopkins' Witch Hunt. And he says, all this political weirdness you're looking at, Danny, doesn't it centre at the same point as Matthew Hopkins' A Rise in Great Yarmouth? And I go, that is very weird. And he encourages me down this line of thought. And I've ended up in this weird hybrid of taking a more political look at witch hunting ever since. And it's been a really, really interesting journey.
I am so glad. We have touched upon other witches in England, but we've never got as far down as where you are. So can you tell us what was happening at that time of the witchcraft accusations you're going to tell us about? What was the political things that were happening at the time?
East Anglia is really interesting because, again, like a lot of the areas affected by the witch hunt in Scotland, it's a place where there's a collapse of the central government quite often. So because there's a civil war on, judges can't arrive in East Anglia. The army's in control under the Eastern Association. Trials aren't being run by central court judges, by circuit assizes. They're being run by local people who obviously are then being driven by their fears of witchcraft. is also a point of real tension, but there's not been a collapse in total government. You know, the town I'm looking at, Great Yarmouth, is like many others. They're very centrally run boroughs. They've been given the right to pick their own governors, their own judges, their own little communities. But they've lost the sense of people telling them what to do, and they're kind of confused and lost. The Civil War itself, which is affecting all three kingdoms of Britain, is having a tremendous effect on East Anglia. Not as bad as, say, the places like in the Midlands or in the north, where there's armies tramping upwards and downwards. Instead, there's problems with starvation, with people moving out of the countryside, the fear of invasion. It's a really tense time, and it's not surprising then that people see this in apocalyptic religious terms. In East Anglia particularly, it's been a heartland of Puritanism. So again, the kind of Calvinists who feel inspired by what's going on in Scotland, but maybe don't always entirely agree with it, but also by people who go further than that. In particular, the town I'm looking at, Great Yarmouth, has an issue of Congregationalists. So these are people who don't believe in this one central kirk or church or elders and presbyters. They want every little separate congregation. And more than that, we have people like Quakers. I hope I get to talk more about them because they're very fun. But they are accused of the worst heresy since time began. And there's this real fear of communities falling apart, divided amongst themselves. And sometimes one of the things I wonder, and one of the things I've argued in my thesis, is that the witch, as well as being literally a woman who you don't trust in your community, usually, the witch is also a stand-in for the heretics or the rebels or the people dividing your community. That in many ways, the witch is the ultimate heretic. Instead of just a slightly different religious view, they're literally joining Team Satan. So all of this is going on, and it feeds into this air of chaos and disorder, which creates such a fertile soil for witchcraft accusations.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. That is the fertile soil that we see up in Scotland as well. The Reformation, poverty, hardship, people trying to outdo one another for godliness. Before you go on and talk about Matthew Hopkins, why the Quakers? What's so interesting about them?
Well, there's a very odd man who turns up in Great Yarmouth, a man called John Boggis. Originally, he's part of a regiment of cavalry led by Charles Fleetwood. I think it's Charles. There's several different Fleetwoods in the Civil War, and you need to be very careful. You know, I expect I'll get plenty of emails about which Fleetwood it really is. But he was employed as a cavalry officer, and he was a man whose religious views were unorthodox. And he brings with him a group of people. I think one of his is a doctor called Lawrence Clark, but this John Boggis, who's, you know, starts off as this doctor's mate. He is able to get into Great Yarmouth and becomes a member of the community there. But he starts making a fuss of himself. You know, he starts saying things like, the Bible's but paper. And when they're having dinner and after they're saying grace, who are you saying grace to? It's this real nuisance. And it escalates. So you've got the local good Puritan vicar is sitting there having dinner, and then Boggis and his mates burst in and demand a theological debate.
How tedious. They're the worst at dinner parties.
Exactly. You're having a nice time, and then suddenly the Quakers come in. And
were Quakers in those days what I think that Quakers are now? So Quakers were anti-war, and there's no ministers such as there, and the Quakers all sit around in a circle, and then they just think and reflect.
Again, these early Quakers, it's quite hard to tell, in that partly this is just a name used for a group of people. It doesn't become condensed into the modern Quakers, the pacifists we know today at this time. And, you know, like a lot of these religious terms, like Puritan and others, it's meant as an insult. But Boggis certainly, he seems to be someone who thinks a lot and forms grouping, but he, you know, obviously he spent time in the army. He's not quite a pacifist.
Yeah, well, I was wondering that, or had that completely put him off war?
I'm not sure. Obviously, he quit the regiment to become a nuisance in Great Yarmouth because they went off to fight, and he remains there. But unfortunately, most of what we know about him is from this angry letter from the vicar of Great Yarmouth saying about what an awful time he's had of him.
Couldn't be any more British, sort of, dare I say, English, that we know about it from angry letters.
I mean, the amount of sources that I rely on is just angry vicars. Well, it's two of them, which is quite a lot, considering, 3 of them if I have a vicar's son. again, one of my other favourite records from early on, slightly less witch related, is from the previous vicar, a man called Matthew Brooks. He's a Calvinist, but he's a conformist one. He's very happy with Charles I's very pretty church. But the local Puritans hate him. And so he sends this 5-page petition to Parliament about all the mean things that happened to him. Some of it's really touching, like this poor fellow. He goes to Parliament to defend himself from the local Puritans. And so when he's away, he leaves his poor pregnant wife with their 8 children at home.
Oh,
8 children.
8 children. She's looking after the house. In the middle of the night, in February, there's a local group get together. They build a bonfire in the street and they start burning it up. And 3 of them are supposedly in fancy dress as the 3 most important people of the kingdom. I think one of them's got to be the Archbishop of Canterbury, got to be Lord. Not sure about the other 2. And they go to one of the bailiffs, which is Great Yarmouth's equivalent of a mayor. And he provides them with lots of booze. They seem very jolly and angry. And they decide to go and knock on this door. So you imagine this poor woman alone with her 8 children, heavily pregnant. And he goes, "We demand entry for the Archbishop of Canterbury," presumably this guy dressed up. And it's all other things we go, Puritans, they're such a mixed bag. They're people who
I thought Puritans didn't drink. I would just like to add the caveat. My understanding of Puritans is almost entirely down to horrible histories. So
That's even more than I've got. I don't even have horrible histories.
my understanding is they had very functional names and there was absolutely no drinking, from my understanding. So to hear them getting dressed up and being silly and frivolous and drunk is quite
Raucous.
boggling.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question with that, because the Puritans are the people, as again with the witch hunt, which we get back to that, these are the people who lead it, the people who are involved in inviting in Matthew Hopkins, the people who pay for the trials, who pay for the witnesses, who pay for the women who search for the bodies of the witches, are this godly elite. But they're also sponsoring people to get angry and drunk and attack the local vicar. You know, there's this fascinating dichotomy. You know, some of the time they're paying money to pay for the new schools, new workhouses to help the poor. And then others, they just...
Are they trying to drum up a fear of the devil? What do you think the purpose of what they were doing was?
There's this desire for purity constantly. The desire to... So partly this vicar, Matthew Brooks, has replaced the previous vicar, a man called John Brinsley, the one who was complaining about the Quaker, who's been there since about 1625 on and off. And they want to bring him back. They want to finally get rid of this interloper who's been told, you know, he's put back all the stained glass. He's moved the pulpit around. He's very confrontational. He's very, you know, promoting this higher church, this Laudian pretty church, and which the Puritans don't like.
And is this the father of 8? Is the father of 8 the interloper?
The father of 8's the interloper, Matthew Brooks. Yeah, trying to keep all this in my head has been fun.
It's a lot of characters. So he didn't fit in with the norm then at that time.
Yeah. The religious norm in the town is these wealthy merchants made their money selling hoses or beeswax or traveling backwards and forwards to the North Sea. They're the people who run the place, who are very heavily Puritan. They pay for Brinsley, they support him, and they you know, there are rumours of women, wives bullying this vicar. They've just had enough of this interloper.
And then how does that then seg into the witch hunts and witch trials?
So again, we've got this fascinating religious dichotomy that John Brinsley, the Puritan vicar, comes back. He's become deeply entwined with the witch hunt. We have 2 very good accounts of the witch hunts in Great Yarmouth. One of whom is a satirical royalist poem, which is the one I talk about in the talk you may have seen online. The second very good account of the witch hunt at Great Yarmouth is by Sir Matthew Hale, who you've probably heard of as one of the leading legal experts and hater of witches. When he was at university, he met the son of the assistant to John Brinsley in Great Yarmouth, who supposedly told him all about the witch hunt and mentioned that the woman accused, a woman by the name of Elizabeth Bradwell, she had been calling for charity at the church, met John Brinsley, and it was John Brinsley as Puritan minister who actually got the confession from her that she'd been practicing witchcraft. And you think, you know, what's kind of going on there? So again, you've got this dichotomy between they're providing charity, they're looking after the poorest in their community, but they're also the people who are getting confessions out of them.
I think that's one of the saddest accusations of witchcraft, is when people come asking for alms and not only don't get them, but then are blamed for bad things that happen. We don't know why then he chose this woman to blame for witchcraft.
Well, this woman, she had a bit of a history with one of the local leading merchants, a man called Henry Moulton. So Henry Moulton, again, he's a wealthy clothing merchant. He's, living a pretty good life, but he's getting on a bit. He's got a young son, and he's left the young son at home. He's again seen as to be a very godly man. The account I was talking about from Matthew Hale stresses that Henry Moulton was always going to church. He was doing his prayers regularly. And Elizabeth Bradwell comes to his house. She's not even asking for charity. She's asking for work, but she doesn't get any. She then says, well, can I have some charity? Nothing. So she leaves angry. And again, in what's quite a common story you've mentioned lots of times, I'm sure, she goes back home. She feels angry. And then a man in black comes to her in the middle of the night and offers her money. He offers her revenge, but only if she signs his little black book in blood. So again, she makes her mark, and then he promises her revenge. So first of all, she wants revenge on Henry Moulton, his man of business, the man she dealt with, or a maid. And all of those are too godly. They can't be hurt, according to Matthew Hale's account. So the devil suggests, why not Henry Moulton's young son? So he gives her this little wax poppet. She sticks a pin in, according to the account. She buries in the churchyard. And this poor child, is ill for 1.5 years. So you can imagine how Henry Moulton's going to be concerned if this wasting away this child. Finally puts the connection together. And again, it's understandable, in a time of hardship when charity is going to be difficult to manage, their increased taxation, trade's really bad because there's some bad piracy in the North Sea. He makes that connection. And then she supposedly makes this confession to the local vicar. So no Hopkins involved.
So no Hopkins involved up to this stage. So let me get this right. The writing in the book and the blood and the man coming to her in black, that was information which they got from her as a confession. Yes. Do we know, she says somewhat cynically, do we know whether or not she was tortured or denied sleep, which is obviously another form of torture? Do we just not know about that?
According to Matthew Hale's account, no sleep torture is mentioned. That's not to say it didn't happen, just to say the person recalling the story to Hale is quite disjointed. It's relatively short, but we do know she was in prison for a couple of months, because again, we get the initial accusation, I believe, in April. And then the actual comes to court in September.
I wonder at what point in her imprisonment she gave the account. I wonder how quickly she gave it. So at what point does Matthew Hopkins come into Great Yarmouth story?
Well, I've got the fantastic quote. It's the corporation, so the people who run Great Yarmouth, in August 1645, invite the Witchfinder Hopkins to make search for such wicked persons, if any be here.
Right.
So again, it comes from above, that the people of the corporation, the people who are supposed to be running this town for the benefit of the entire community, but they're, again, an unelected merchant oligarchy that's self-selected over the last 20, 30 years, decide that the problem's got so bad with all these accusations, they need to bring in Matthew Hopkins.
Was Matthew Hopkins by this stage already the famous Witchfinder, or
Yes.
was he early in his career? What stage was he at?
This is, I think, about 6 or 7 months in after what started in Essex. So he's been involved in the early trials there. He's already been travelling across the country. This is getting almost to the sort of quite late in his career. This is when things are starting to unravel a bit. There are 11 people accused of witchcraft in total. 6 of them are convicted and 5 are hanged. Compare that to, say, the earlier trials where you get quite high conviction rates from Matthew Hopkins. There's been a little bit more cynicism about him and his methodology.
Oh, that's very interesting. So he comes to town.
Yes.
What does he do? Does he interview all the people? How does he go about his task?
Now, we've got limited evidence of what he's up to. So compared to other towns where it's mentioned that he's searching bodies, he's providing evidence, we know he was in the court, we know he's invited to the town. However, The searchers, the women who are hired to search the bodies for the marks that would show that they've made a pact with the devil, are drawn from Great Yarmouth community. They're midwives. I think he's mentioned that they're paid too much, because there's a note from the Corporation of Great Yarmouth saying that we spent a lot of money on this. We need to make sure if we do this in future, we're only going to pay 6 of them.
It's interesting that when that sort of the common myth is that those accused were women who were midwives. It's quite interesting to think that in this case, it was midwives that were actually sort of rooting out who the witches, the accused, were. That's quite curious to me, actually.
Yes, well, they're being pretty well paid. They're obviously treated as experts.
Yeah.
So they'd be paid 12 pence a day for their services. And then in future, only 4 women to be employed. So Elizabeth, Harwade, and 3 other midwives of her choice. So these are obviously very respectable women who are trusted to pursue the witch hunt.
And is there any sort of a note of how many women they deemed were not witches?
Yes. So we've got the first round of witch hunting, where we've got 2 men, but the other 9 are women. So therefore, of those, 6 were seen to be witches, but one of them was let go. I think they said that they were possibly too old to be hanged.
Interesting.
And then we have a second round of accusations that happen at the time of the witch hunt itself. There's a further 6 women accused, but none of them are found guilty. Which again is very interesting, that you've had people inspired by fear, but the second round of witch hunts, we have no evidence there that the people involved in this are wealthy people like Henry Moulton, seem a lot poorer. And the women themselves, there's 2 of them who seem to be illegitimate. So they're very low down, but they still seem to be connected to other people. Well, lots of the people accused in the first round, they don't seem to note there's any men around them. They're either spinsters or widows.
That's actually according more with the idea of the people that were accused of witchcraft in Scotland, that they were all older, that they were all single, and of course some of them were, but in fact the demographic doesn't bear out that it was the majority of them. So that's interesting in this case, that it actually was more the stereotype, the idea of people found as witches.
And did they execute women in the same way in England as they did in Scotland?
In England, they are hanging witches. I believe some of them are burnt in Scotland, but again, it can vary from place to place. Again, in Great Yarmouth, they were all hanged. Those convicted, apart from the one who was let go. But obviously, I think, as Marion Gibson talked about, there was example of a woman in Ipswich who was burnt because she was murdering her husband.
Yeah, what was that? Petite
Peason.
Yeah. And then did they destroy the accused, all the guilty's bodies as well?
I believe they were buried outside the churchyard, but I've not actually seen that much evidence of where they were buried. That's something I ought to check up on, so thank you.
Well, we know that in Scotland, generally, they destroyed the bodies, they burned the bodies afterwards, and they were generally not burned in Scotland. They were, we've been told, garroted or hanged. And then they burned the bodies. And we've heard recently from one historian, I forget quite who, that they were garroted on basically a pyre. And then once they'd been garroted, it was then set on fire. That might have been Marion that told us that, possibly, Marion Gibson. I'm not sure. But there is obviously a myth that all the witches were burnt at the stake, but we know that that's not the case generally.
Can I ask, going back to Hopkins, because it's such a big name, what was it that made him famous in his role? And was he called the Witchfinder General?
I mean, he certainly called himself the Witchfinder General. The big thing about Hopkins, why he's so fantastic as a character, he's a self-propagandist.
Is that it? Right, okay.
So partly he's pulling on a heritage. In East Anglia, lots of people sent out for the army to make sure they had money, to make sure they had food to support the army. But they also sent out a man called William Dowsing. His job was to break things for being too Catholic, too papist, too pretty. So he'd go around the churches and he'd just smash things. We know so much about it because he kept a diary of everything he destroyed. It's a fantastic resource. But as Malcolm, who I'm sure will talk more about this, has pointed out, the route that Hopkins takes to start off with, him and his associates, John Stern, follows the route that Dowsing took. He is while Dowsing was employed by the Eastern Association, by the local military authorities to do this, Hopkins is kind of aping this. He follows the same kind of route. And while he doesn't have an official job from the East Association, for the military authorities, to go and witch hunt, he acts like he does, which I think is quite important. He gives himself authority.
So he just turns up, identifies himself as the Witchfinder General, and then, without any authority from anyone, inserts himself into these historical trials.
The first trial he's a part of. So he's in Essex. Again, Gaskell, Malcolm will probably be annoyed at me for massacring the story. He tells it so much better. But what he does is he was part of this trial where he feels like he's threatened by the local witches back in his community in Huntingdonshire. I think at one point he talks about being threatened by this huge black dog on the road. He knows he's onto something. He's onto this giant witchcraft conspiracy. And so therefore he gains a reputation at the court, at the trials, for providing evidence, for knowing all these methodologies. He's obviously read his James I/6th on the demonology, so brings up things like swimming and pricking. All this stuff, he's well equipped with the knowledge. So therefore he gains a reputation from that. So he's then invited by the next community to come in. So as his reputation builds, he's invited. And one of the things I find interesting about this process is one of the people I look at in Great Yarmouth is an MP, a man called Miles Corbett. Miles Corbett, his other job, his day job, is called the Recorder, which basically means like a judge/legal expert for the town. He's also the legal expert for Aldborough, which is again slightly further down the coast in Suffolk. And he's the Recorder for King's Lynn. Each of those are towns. Matthew Hopkins is invited to come and visit. He does a little hunt there, less successful as he goes along the coast. But you got this sense that, Miles Corbett sees himself as a godly man, later involved as a regicide. He sees in Hopkins someone who's doing good work for the godly cause, and maybe he's the one who's inviting him to each community.
So as his legitimacy grows, by inserting himself into the first trial, then getting a name for himself, then going to the next place, of course, it would be the hand of God that would be guiding him to these things, if he's a godly man and he's searching out these people as witches. Do we have any idea how many people Hopkins accused of witchcraft, or how many trials he was in?
I don't think he accuses that many people. So I think he's linked to one trial, these early trials in Essex. What he does instead is he provides this role of expert witness, like almost a pathologist. He's someone who has the knowledge, he knows the connections, he knows what he's looking for, and he makes it convincing. So he's linked to swimming, he's linked to...
Now, is swimming the idea that witches would sink?
Yes.
So they couldn't swim?
Well, so, no, they're rejected by the water.
Oh,
they float upwards, yes.
They're repelled by the water.
Yeah.
And that's something to do with their baptism, because
Yes.
they've renounced their baptism, so water will repel them, so they can't swim.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think the worst example of that is in Framlingham, where an 80-year-old vicar, a man called John Lowes, if I remember correctly, he is brought into the castle moat at Framlingham. And, he's obviously a frail, doddery vicar who's just, again, a little bit too conformist for the local Puritans. And he's forced to be swum. He raises up and then he's hung. So Hopkins, but also we have to remember it's not just Hopkins, he's got his assistant Stern. So Hopkins, I think, travels mostly along the east coast. Stern goes slightly further inland and then goes on further to Ely and into the Fens.
And these times that you've looked at in Great Yarmouth, are they the height of witch hunts in that area?
I think this is getting basically towards the point where it's starting to die off.
Mm-hmm.
That people are becoming more cynical about Hopkins. That again, he is quite expensive, his services. You have to pay for him to come to visit your town. He has to stay somewhere nice because he's a gentleman. He's of decent status. But also you're having to pay for the assistants.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a time when the war is going well for Parliament, but it's starting to not look great for Puritans. The new army, the new model army that's being created, is being dominated by the religiously radical, and by people who these towns of Puritans don't like. It's almost like this moment where the witch hunt, to me, seems really possible, because there's a lot of Puritans who believe in this idea of Presbyterianism, like the Scottish Church, one united church. So heretics, like the Congregationalists, who want to have separate little churches, Quakers, Baptist, Anabaptist, all these new communities that are sprouting out of the ground and being supported by the New Model Army. It's victory justifying their cause as opposed to the Presbyterian Calvinist cause. So they're feeling that they're falling apart, but they haven't quite broken. You see places like Colchester, where the witch hunt's kind of disjointed, partly because you've already got the religious radicals having more influence. In Great Yarmouth, the religious radicals gain more of a voice between the first hunt and the second hunt, which I think is one of the reasons why the second hunt in the spring of 1646 is unsuccessful. All these people, why they want to hunt is to bring unity and peace to a community that feels divided. And Hopkins offers that. He offers the service of restoring unity. But obviously it's not working that well. You got rid of the witches, but still feels like the world's falling apart.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you're like, okay, we've got rid of the witches and damn, all our problems still seem to be here. That's an oddity, given the fact that it was the witches that were causing all these problems.
A common theme. Can I ask you, just as a sort of a final-ish type of a question, if that's okay, are you familiar with the new TV programme that's coming out, The Witchfinder?
I know it's been threatening to come out for a little while. I'm interested to see what they do with it.
Yeah, because it's in East Anglia. It's 1647, and I'm curious because it's got an amazing cast, brilliant writers, and the premise of it looks like it'll probably be really, really good actually. But part of me is a bit like, oh, it's a bit icky, to make comedy out of such a horrendous time. I'm really hoping, I think, Claire, you'd maybe said this to me, that the accused witch will sort of give the witch finder the runaround and we'll get the best of him. And hopefully that is what it is. But what do you think about that?
Well, first of all, can they actually do an East Anglian accent? Or is it just going to be Mummerset?
So what does an East Anglian accent sound like?
Well, it differs. I mean, I was brought up on Norfolk and sadly dying dialect, which is pretty thick. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard of the singing postman. No. Well, again, sorry, this part of the podcast is just for Norfolk people. Suggestion is even the Mississippi accent is kind of like it's a slowed down version of what Norfolk sounds like. It's like, ain't got light boy.
Oh.
But it's people sometimes compare it to Somerset, but it's a very distinctive thing. But it is on the wane, I think, sadly.
Is it Daisy May Cooper that's the actress that's the accused woman? Now, I don't know where she's from. To me, as a Scot, she's just got this really peculiar accent. I'm not really sure where she's actually from. And I don't know how much she hams it up on the comedy show that she does, like I can't remember what the name of the program is. This Country.
Yeah.
And I don't know where exactly that's set. It looks
I think that's supposed to be more West Country, so that's going to annoy me if she's going to go West Country.
It's like when anything's done in Scotland, they've always got Glaswegian accents, even if they're from somewhere completely different. So that's quite irritating to us, obviously, in the same way. So I'm quite curious.
I am hoping it's a wee bit like Blackadder, where it's set during the trenches in the Second World War. Not a laughing matter. But the fact of the matter is, it's just a background device for comedy to take place.
Yeah.
Rather than being the point of it. I mean, I wasn't too delighted over two things that I've seen so far. One, they're actually starting the thing on International Women's Day. You've got 364 other days of the year you can choose. Why would you bring out a comedy about women getting killed as witches on International Women's Day? And the other thing is that one of the stills for it is Daisy May Cooper, who I do think is hilarious, and the Witchfinder, and they're both standing, and there's a noose behind them. I was kind of like, I'm just not sure that's comedy.
I think it's a bit problematic from the point of view of, I don't think you'd get a comedy that was set during the time of enslaving people in the Deep South, particularly, or, like say maybe during the Holocaust and the Second World War. I just don't, I don't know. It sits a little bit uncomfortable with me. I mean, I'm prepared to give it the benefit of the doubt. And if they deal with it like Blackadder did, I think that's a really good comparison, that it's clever and it's a device to kind of maybe show up the ridiculousness of the situation. So I'm not condemning it, because I think they're really great cast and great writers. So I've got every hope that it's not going to be a Mrs. Brown's Boys Does Witches type of a situation. So shudder. But we'll see. We'll see. And Danny, maybe you can keep us right on Twitter about whether the accent is correct or not at the time.
There is a monument in Great Yarmouth to two women who were convicted of witchcraft at Salem.
There's a monument to two of the people that were accused of witchcraft in Salem. How did that come about? What's the connection?
Well, the early people who travelled to New England were drawn quite easily from the East Anglian coast, because it's the most accessible part of that area to travel to the New World. And I think during the Civil War, actually, the Bright family left Great Yarmouth to travel to Salem. So they then got caught up in the Salem witch hunt. So they've been left this quite nice brass plaque in the back of St. Nicholas's Church.
That's bizarre when we're saying, in memoriam to those poor people of Salem that were accused of witchcraft, and obviously that was wrong. And presumably there's nothing to the people who were accused and executed here.
It highlights the complete bonkersness of what happened to the witch trials in Britain. It's like we just kind of went, let's just pretend that didn't happen. And because Salem's had some stuff happen over there, we'll just focus on them, pretend we didn't do such terrible things.
Yeah, it's like, Salem's really taking the heat off us, guys.
Barbarian Americans, it's really odd. Thank you so much for coming on today. We've really appreciated it. And it's really interesting to see the contrast of what happened in Great Yarmouth with what's happened in different stories that we've covered in Scotland and across Scotland as a whole. So we really appreciate you coming on. And now that you have just found out in the last week or so that you are a fully fledged PhD doctor, congratulations on that. It's wonderful after so much work. And I think whoever you end up teaching, whichever establishment you end up going and working at, will be very lucky to get somebody so enthusiastic as yourself.
Absolutely. We've really enjoyed speaking to you today.
Please do keep in touch with us on Twitter so we can watch where your academic career takes you next. And no doubt you'll have a book out soon. So we'll keep up to date with that. No pressure.
And we look forward to, first of all, your accent review, and also let's stay in contact and see what we think of the TV show as a whole. Thanks so much for joining us today, Dan.
Thank you very much for the chance to talk.
So, Claire, that was another amazing session with the Witches of Scotland podcast. We roll again next time, 2 weeks' time. We can't tell you who our guest is just now because I think we don't really know what order we're going to release the next one in, do we?
No, but we've got a few in the can.
You in the can. That sounds so professional. I love that.
It does. Yeah.
So it's been great. I'm feeling like things are really gathering a real head of steam now, aren't they?
Absolutely. I'm not sure whether or not we're going to have time, or you're going to have time to have the raccoons fully trained by the time this is debated in Parliament.
I'm under the cosh. I'm trying to train my child that's in 5th year to get her A into G and get her hires done at the moment. So that's actually harder. And I'm not even joking. That's harder than I think to train all the raccoons. I'm having a small nervous breakdown.
Presumably the raccoons are easier, to one of those clicker things and wee bits of...
Well, I'll tell you this, the raccoons don't give me any cheek. He will just work for snacks and it doesn't work for her. So my mind is melting on the daily at the moment, but if I survive, I'll carry on.
Next time. We've got lots to do, and in a fortnight's time, Zoe, we will have already been to the Scottish Women of the Year award, I think. Will we? Almost?
Yes, we will have.
So that's something to look forward to the next couple of weeks. Anyway.
Yes. Well, from one finalist of the Scottish Women of the Year to another, Claire Mitchell QC, I bid you adieu.
And adieu, and adieu to all of you who listen. See you in a fortnight. Bye.
Oh, bye.
If you'd like to learn more about the Witches of Scotland, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our mailing list at www.witchesofscotland.com to keep updated with the campaign. On that site, you'll be able to find how to link with us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.